Greetings. I am Dr. Beloved, and I am here to share the story of my survival and overcoming of childhood sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional torment. So, I grew up in New York City. I was the youngest of three children, and I was there with my mom and my stepfather. My biological father lived in the city, so he was not a part of our family on a day-to-day basis. I can recall all the way back to when I was about 2.5 that there was something that was going on in my home that was not appropriate. And I say 2.5 because I can remember that I was still wearing diapers when my stepfather started engaging me with. I did not have wonderful parents. My parents were predators. It was a normal thing to have the police at our apartment Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That was normal. If the police were not there, that meant we weren't there. As a little girl, it was normal for me to go and jump on my parents' bed early in the morning. My mom would leave for work about 6 o'clock, and my older siblings were in school. And so that left me in the apartment with my stepfather. So from Monday through Friday, I was left with my stepfather alone in the apartment. And what would happen was, as soon as he assured the fact that my mother and my siblings were gone, he would get in the middle of the bed and take off all of his clothes. And he had burns on his chest. And so, being a young person, a child, a baby even, I was curious and would touch his chest, and he would say, "Oh, it's okay. It feels good. Continue to touch my chest." And then he would take my hands and he would move my hand slowly down his torso to his midsection. He would take my hand, my small hands, and put it on his, and then he would move his penis up and, massaging it, masturbating up and down until he reached climax. And then my response would be, "Well, what is that?" And he would say, "Taste it." And we would go in the shower and we would take a shower together every day. This was normal. This was my routine every single day. So I am certain about the discourse or the timeline, because they were prepping me to go to nursery school, and I would not give up the bottle. And so he trained me in providing oral sex through, and at the same time getting off the bottle by trading me a banana. And so with that, he trained me also how to provide oral sex for him, and that was normal. And if you can imagine him 6'2", I'm maybe 40 pounds, and my eye level is his genitals. When summer came, then the story got broader. One day we're playing and I hear him say, "It's time for you to go in the back room." Go in the back room, okay? Go in the back room. When I go in the back room, my brother and my sister are there. And my stepfather's famous line was, "If I do one of you, I do all of you." And my brother, I'll never forget the look on his face. The look on his face was devastation. And my brother said, "No, no, 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 no. Whatever you're doing to her, do me." And so my brother says, "Sharon, whatever you do, don't come down the hall." And I promised him, but of course I lied. And to my dismay, when I went down the hall and peeked through the door with the crystal handle, this man was violating my brother. We began to make a game out of being violated. We would switch from youngest to oldest, from oldest to youngest. And again, this went on for a very, very long time. Our sexual abuse, or my specific sexual abuse, went on from 2.5 until 9 years old. My stepfather was forcing himself inside of me, a little girl. And so as a young person, I had arthritis because my hands would swell from masturbating him every day. And I would tell my mother, and her response to that was to pour green alcohol and Bengay on my hands, rub my hands, and she would wrap them in ace bandages at night. But never once did she decide to leave this man, and she stayed with them. They were married for 55 years. To further injury to insult her, he would always take pictures of us before he abused us and after he abused us. As kids, I remember I decided that I was going to protect my brother. I was not going to allow him to be harmed and I would sleep in the back room where he was. And I remember one time my stepfather came in there and he recognized that I was in there with my brother, and he was trying to insert the safety pins into my vagina. And I can remember after him and my mother would be intimate, I don't know, automatically, innately just wake up. And as he was passing our bedroom door, he would look over my mother's shoulder and he would mouth to me, "You're next." On Sundays when we would play, me and my sister would play in the room, he would come and stand in the doorway with a book of matches. And this room only had we were on the top floor of the apartment building, and the room only had a big window of that for ventilation. It was a wired window. And he would come to the door and he would block the door full body, and he would just start just lighting the matches and dropping them and saying, "I'm gonna burn you little up." This was just his nature to be creepy. It was his nature to be disgusting. It was his nature to be deplorable. And I remember there was only one television in our apartment, so we would all gather in their bedroom, and I would be sitting on the foot of the bed, and he would start tickling me and tickling me. And then he would tickle me, and he had long fingers with broken fingernails, and he would just start scratching me with the fingernails. And then if he couldn't reach me with his hands, he would take his toes and dig in my vagina. Anytime he had access to me, he was violating me. I remember around the time I was 8 or 9, and I started having bad stomach pains. I remember me and my sister was outside playing horsey, and one day all of a sudden my stomach just started hurting tremendously. I was just bent over, doubled over in pain. And so they took me to the hospital because the pain would not stop. And when they examined me, I had a tubal infection. And the doctor said, a fallopian tubal infection. And they said the only way that she could have had this type of infection is that she's having sex. So my mother looks at me very sternly and say, "You better not say anything." It was the early 1970s. I'm just another little black girl, another little brown girl. And so they did not do their duty. They did not report this violation. And I was sent back home. I was in the 3rd or 4th grade, and I began to develop bleeding stomach ulcers. My mother took me to Dr. on Washington Street. And I said very adamantly, "I want to speak to the doctor in private." And my mother told the doctor, "Whatever she tells you, do not believe her. She's a liar." And so, I started to try to tell him what was going on. And of course, my mother abruptly interrupted the examination and so forth and so on. But his question was, what is going on in a 3rd grader's life that she has bleeding ulcers? I had infections, I had STDs from my stepfather, I had bleeding ulcers, and then I had nosebleeds. And then added to that, I started sleepwalking. They started tying me to the bed because I would wake up in the middle of the night and just start sleepwalking and going into the kitchen and stumbling over things. And then I had a horrible lisp until I got to the 5th grade, and by that time we had moved to the other side of the city, and my mother felt like anything that was positive that was going on in my life, or anything that was negative that was going on in my life, was an extension of her. So one day I'm walking down the hall, and I overhear this boy getting speech lessons, or he's in a speech class, not knowing that this teacher was an actual speech pathologist. And I say to him, I said, "Can you help me? I am so tired of talking like this. I've been picked on all of my life." After school at 2:35, me and would walk across to the grass, and the kids would say, "We're gonna beat up Cheryl Jones." And it got so frequent that I would just go lay in the grass, and they would jump on top of me and beat me up and slap me around. Then one day, this girl, she had just moved from the Bronx, and she came to our school, and said, "Oh, beat up Cheryl. She's the girl to beat. She's easy to beat. She won't fight back." And so that's what I did. And of course, I went in my spot where I laid down in the grass, and she jumped on me. And my brother had been hearing about me getting beat up on a regular basis. And he said to me, "Sharon, you got to fight." So I had 3 names. I had Sharon, Cheryl, and now I'm beloved. Cheryl was my birth name, Sharon was my nickname, and beloved is the woman that I became. On August the 10th, 2021, I went and changed my name legally because I never felt beloved. I never felt cherished or adored or treasured or any of those things. And I knew that every time that name would go out into the atmosphere, I was changing my destiny. So that day, after got off of me, I heard my brother's voice in my ear. You got to fight back. And so as she began to walk into Bowman Towers, I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, listen, my brother said, if I don't beat you up, he's going to beat me up. And needless to say, I put a whooping on her that day. Honey, I scratched and punched and scratched and punched and jumped on top of her. And it was taking all of my energy to fight back like this. I was like, I was dealing with violence in my home. I didn't want to be violent toward anyone else. And then she had a little scratches, a little bit blood. And then her mom called my mom and I got a whooping for defending myself that day. So it was like almost in vain. Another thing that was very interesting is that my mother was a cleaning fanatic. And so I remember one Saturday we're cleaning the apartment and I think one of them said something about their menstrual cycle. And I said, I know where that comes from. A girl bleeds out of her butt, out of her behind. And my mother said, what did you say? And I said, I know why mama's always mad. She's mad because she thinks her husband is having sex with you. And my mother said, what did you say? And this look of rage, I mean, like she transformed into a whole different human being. And she began to chase me around the apartment. We had bunk beds. And she got a belt and I jumped atop of the bed and I slid down the back and I ran past her. And as I'm running, my sister that's closest to me, for some reason, and she said, oh, she ran into the shower. She's in there. And I remember I ran in there and I was now cornered in the shower. And my mother grabbed me and body slammed me in the shower. And she jumps on top of me. She is choking the life out of me. The veins are bulging in her neck and the veins are bulging in my neck and there's whelps all over me and she's scratching me and she's beating me with a broomstick and she had with one hand and she is choking me and her full body weight is on top of my chest. And as my mother is choking me with one hand, she reaches up and grabs a hammer, all steel from handle to top. And as she jumping and grabbing and coming down to hit me on the head, my oldest sister jumps on her back and says, you're going to kill her. And she says, that's my intention. I'm going to kill this today. And then my mother and my sister are tussling and they're rolling and things are knocking and breaking. And I have just enough room to get up from under my mother's clutch. And I am breathing and heavily and I'm bleeding and my clothes are torn and I'm tattered. And by now we have an audience to the back door of our apartment. You know, people are coming and trying to figure out what in the world is going on. And my mother and my sister is tussling and we had a neighbor. Her name was Miss, and she screams at my mother, what in the world is wrong? You're gonna kill your child over a... And so she grabs me and pulls me out from the midst. And by that time, the police have arrived. And you know, they're looking at my mother. My mother is slobbering from the mouth. I mean, just like a wild animal. When we moved across town, across the city to the other, into a very nice neighborhood, to a nice, decent neighborhood, I remember being afraid because I remember that now my eldest sister wasn't going to be there. And who was going to be there to protect me? By this time, my brother, you know, he wasn't living with us anymore. He was doing his own thing and he had decided that he was going to go into the military. So everything was shifting around me and I didn't have many allies. I had my church. I had joined the church. Church and home was a different lifestyle. I was not permitted to talk about things about church when I came home from church. I was so groomed that when I went to visit my dad, I didn't have the courage to tell my father. And I remember wanting to tell him so badly what was going on. But my sister would always say, you can't tell daddy because daddy will kill him and mama will go crazy. And then if mama goes crazy and daddy goes to prison, who's going to take care of us? And I was thinking, who in the hell is taking care of us now? But I never did tell my dad. And when we would go visit my dad, so we get in the car and we are driving back, and my stepfather says, today I'm going to kill you. I'm going to drive the car off the cliff. And he's driving recklessly and all of doing 90 miles per hour, going up Route 9, and he's just all over the road. And I remember Sonia and her husband, I can't think of his name. He flashes the lights and asks him to pull over. And he said, will you at least allow me to take Sharon and put her in the car? My mother, I'm not leaving him. I'm staying with him. My mother was totally, emphatically dedicated to this demon. So he takes me in the car and drives me home safely. And I'll never forget one night we were coming home from playing from Bowman, and we were standing outside. We were trying to figure out why everybody was looking up. You know, we lived on the top floor, while everybody was looking up, and there is my sister screaming to the top of her lungs, he's gonna kill her, call the police. And at some point, the police just got tired of coming. I remember being really smart, and they wanted to put me in a higher grade, and my mother was like, no. It seemed like anything that could benefit me, my mother was like, no. I went to the nurse's office 4 out of 5 times a week on a regular basis. At some point, I figured I gotta figure out a way to get some attention. So I went, I got in trouble, and I had to go see the principal, Mr. And I remember telling him something was going on at home. He calls my mother in, and of course my mother hushes me. I'm 9, 10 years old, and I'm deciding that I am going to save the family. So all of these things are, all of these illnesses and things that are happening. So I'm sitting there at the edge of the bed, and like clockwork, my stepfather comes in and he grabs my breast. And I jump up and I run into the kitchen, and I said, he touched my breast. And my mother says immediately, I'm so sick of this. And she says, so she calls him, B, come here. And he comes in, and she says, Sharon says that you touched her breast. I don't give a good what she says. She says, and then they go in the bedroom and come back out, and my mother goes back to cooking. And I'm standing there in the hallway like, what's up? Like, when we leaving? When are we packing up? We can go. We can even go back and live with daddy. And she says, just go upstairs. I never let her touch me again. She betrayed me in the worst way. I no longer trusted her. And so I became, I guess, somewhat disrespectful. I had no more honor for her. And in middle school, I started going to counseling and told them what had been going on with me. And the social worker, she contacts my mother. And of course, my mother is angry with me. She is vehemently angry. How could you do this to me? Why would you say that? And so they asked me, did I want to go and live in an orphanage? I was terrified of an orphanage. And so I made sure that I stayed busy. I never was at home. I was involved in cheerleading and different activities. By now we're in high school, and he is the head custodian. I'm telling you, and predators love schools. They love schools. They love churches. They love being coaches. They love being, swim coaches. And then one day a friend of mine says to me, I keep getting these letters in my locker. And ironically, the locker was close to my locker, almost adjacent to my locker. And so she hands me the letter. She says, whose handwriting does this look like? I knew exactly who handwriting it was. It was my stepfather's handwriting, and he was writing letters to young ladies in the school and asking them to meet him in certain places. I decided I'm going to go and meet him where he says to meet this person. Of course, he didn't show up because he saw me there, and he didn't show up. I started collecting the letters and taking them home, and I said, whose handwriting is this? And so, of course, no conversation was had, but the letter stopped. By the time I turned 17, I remember my mother needed operation on her feet, and my stepfather decided that we were eating too much, and so he put chains on the refrigerator and the freezer. Yeah, he put chains on the refrigerator and the freezer. That's what he did. And I decided I had had enough. I'm going to kill this girl. Everybody knew my story. I told my friends about what happened, the friends that would come over, that my mother, would allow to come over and visit. I told them about what had happened to me. And I was like, they'll testify. I know he's going to be partly intoxicated, and he sleeps. His bed is, the side of the bed that he sleeps on is situated that if I run with all of my might and with all of my strength and stab him in the chest, at least I will be able to get away. And as I'm entering the bedroom, on the television is Jan Crouch from TBN. And she's talking about salvation. I'm just angry. I'm just like, God, when does this stop? When do you defend us? When do we get free from all of this hell? And I remember standing there with the knife in my hand, and I heard Holy Spirit say to me, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. And I was so angry with God. I was just so angry. I went back and I dropped the knife back in the drawer. And, my mother came home. And of course, she was like, okay, you got to take the chains off the refrigerator and the freezer. I did poetry as a little girl. One of my hiding places was the library. So I would sit in the library for hours and hours and just read. I started entering poetry contests and oratorical contests with AXO and with the NAACP. And as I'm winning all these contests, and I remember one day, and we're walking back from the newspaper, and my mother said, I'm so sick of you. I'm so sick of you winning all of these contests. I don't want to see your name in the paper. I'm not interested. So I went to college, and I remember becoming a young parent in the first semester of my junior year, and I had to go back and live with them again. I remember one day after having my son, my stepfather was still working in the school system, but by now he had been demoted because he was stealing things from the school. He had been demoted because he was unlocking doors, classrooms, and allowing basketball players to go in there and have sex with their girlfriends, and so he could watch them. One day, we get a knock at the door. The police knocks at the door, and he says, "Is here?" That's all I needed to hear. I said, "Come on to the door, because your husband done molested somebody's child, and that going to jail today." It was all over the news, daily news, everything. My mother had a daycare, a thriving daycare. She lost her business. She lost everything. He had sodomized a little boy at the school that he had been demoted to, and the little boy reported it. As a little girl, I would have blackouts. Sometimes I would be places and didn't know how I got there. I would lose my memory. I sang, I wrote, I acted, I did all these great things, but my mother was such a deterrent. My stepfather went to prison. When he went to court, she demanded us not to tell the truth about anything about our past. She demanded us to go visit him in prison. She told them that he went to prison for stealing computers. I went back to college, but before I went there, I was dating this guy. He said to me, you need to go back to school. You're very smart, and you don't need to be in this little town. And he said, he tells me this in retrospect after I'm pregnant again, while I'm at school, and she has my first son. My mother would call me every morning at 6:00. And she would curse me. "I don't know why you at college. You a no good mother. You are nothing. You never gonna be nothing. Why are you at school?" She would just go on. And this, it happened so much that I would be crying on the phone, and they could hear, my roommates could hear, my dorm mates could hear my mother screaming at me through the phone. And so after a while, they recognized who was calling. And so they would come to the door and they said, "Well, what do you want to do? You want us to answer? You going to take the call, or you're not going to take the call?" I said, I'm not going to take the call. They said, "Don't worry about it. I got you, because I already heard your mother. You don't worry. We got you, girl." So finally, she convinces me to come home because I'm a no good mother. And so I come home and I'm writing this poetry. I'm writing. And my mother takes my son and throws him on the bed, and she picks up my poetry and she begins ripping it to shreds. She just takes the notebook and she throws it on the ground and she's ripping. "You're never going to be nothing. You're not anything." And so what I recognize is that my mother was very jealous of me. My mother viewed me as the side chick. 21 years later, After getting out of domestic violence, relationship, marriage, I went back to college. I got a bachelor's degree, and then I got a master's degree. I got an honorary doctorate. I lobbied with Maxine Waters and Joe Biden, Lynn Rosenthal. They invited me to the Capitol to tell my story before Congress people there. As parents, it is our responsibility to protect our children at all costs. At the time I gave birth to my second child, December 17th, 1988, I'm lying in bed only an hour after giving birth to my child, and my mother opens my hospital door and says, "I have a surprise for you." I'm vulnerable, I'm half naked, and I just gave birth. And in walks my stepfather. And my mother says, "Today he got out of prison. I thought you would like to see him." I thought I was having a next nervous breakdown, and I decided that I was going to admit myself into Georgia Regional. I was so distraught and so depressed. But I remember I called my aunt, and she was a nurse, and she said, "There is nothing wrong with you. It is your mother who has the problem." And so had to go back to that house where he was. And I remember when I came home from the hospital, I said to him, "You can pretend like you don't know what you did to me and my brother and sister." I said, "But if you ever touch my children, I am going to kill you." Now, if you can imagine why I am saying this to him, my mother is standing off on the side going, I mean, like an absolute lunatic. And so they had given me Valium. I was a nervous wreck. I was shaking. I was trembling. And I got into bed. I was just so distraught. And my mother reaches over to try to touch me, to give this pretentious comfort. And I'm thinking, why are you touching me? There is no comfort in your touch. In my closing, as I've raised my children the best that I could, and I fled a domestic violence marriage. I did not want my children to see their mother murdered. And we were on our way to see my mother. And my oldest son has always been a defender of us. He said, "You don't have to keep torturing yourself by going to visit her, by being subject to her meanness." And so I turned my car around and I drove back up the road. Sometimes I hurt my own self. Sometimes I wasn't always careful and loving to myself, but I've matured and I've healed and I've evolved, and I'm doing my best every day to show up as my best self. And I'm thankful. I'm very, very, very thankful for my life now. I've been a Haiti missionary. I've traveled to Germany, and I'm writing books and traveling and thanking God for another opportunity to live on the other side of pain. I never thought that I would even live to be 50 years old. And here I am on the other side. So I'm very, very thankful. It's time for something new.